Nia Williams was 23, juggling 2 delivery jobs in Atlanta to pay the rent on her crumbling apartment and help her little brother through high school. She didn't wear a lab coat or a hoodie with a startup logo. She wore a red insulated delivery bag and a cracked iPhone clipped to her dashboard. But underneath that everyday exterior was something most people completely missed. A brilliant, self-taught coder who had unfinished business with the tech world. You see, Nia was a former computer science student. She had been enrolled at a respected state university, majoring in systems engineering, until her financial aid ran dry halfway through sophomore year. Her mom's medical bills left her no choice. She dropped out and started working full-time. But the love for code never left her. Every free moment between deliveries, she was on her old ThinkPad, debugging Python, submitting pull requests to open-source repos, and building scrappy back-end prototypes just to keep her skills sharp. She wasn't chasing validation anymore, she just needed to build. Atlanta was in one of those stubborn spring moods, humid, gray, and indecisive. Nia was already 5 deliveries deep into her shift, blasting lo-fi beats in her car to stay awake, trying not to think about her drained checking account or the past-due Wi-Fi bill waiting at home. She pulled into TechCorp's corporate lot around 1:20 p.m., 2 minutes ahead of schedule. Not bad, considering traffic on Peachtree was its usual mess. The delivery was standard: pad thai, green curry, iced tea, and a side of mango sticky rice. Nia had been to TechCorp's headquarters before. Their office was sleek, all glass panels, modular furniture, and that corporate minimalist vibe that somehow screamed we burn out developers in style. Normally, she'd hand over the food, maybe trade a polite smile with reception, and move on. But something was different this time. As she stepped into the lobby, she noticed a current in the air. Tense, jittery, barely concealed. The receptionist barely glanced at her before turning back to a call. In the open workspace just beyond the security gate, a cluster of engineers huddled over their laptops. One guy was pacing in socks, whispering frantically into a headset. Another was scribbling diagrams on a whiteboard, his hand trembling with frustration. Nia paused, not in a nosy way, more like someone who had once been part of this world and still instinctively tuned into its chaos. She didn't need details to know something was broken. The client's signature was delayed, so she waited, just a few feet from the reception desk. That's when she saw it, a large monitor behind the glass, half obscured by a succulent plant and a forgotten energy drink. It was a terminal window, scrolling logs, red text, a trace that looked oddly familiar. She didn't lean in, didn't overstep, but her mind kicked into gear like muscle memory. Stack Overflow recursion, memory leak in progress. The trace was pointing to a repeating loop inside what looked like a self-healing function, but the behavior didn't make sense, unless someone passed a mutable reference where a static copy was expected. That would be catastrophic. She didn't plan on saying anything. It wasn't her place, and the last thing she wanted was to come off like she was fishing for attention. But after watching the same line repeat itself again and again on that screen, something in her just snapped into place. A tiny voice said, "Say it. If you're wrong, you'll walk away. But if you're right." What came next wasn't a confrontation. Just a single sentence, spoken calmly, like she was ordering lunch. "You might want to check line 274. Looks like it's expecting a cloned object, not a reference." That moment, unplanned, uninvited, would crack open everything that followed. You'd think someone who rescued a company's infrastructure, live, on-site, in the middle of an operational crisis, would at least earn a thank you. Maybe a handshake. Or at the very least, basic respect. Instead, Nia was met with silence. Not stunned silence. Not respectful silence. This was the kind that follows after someone walks into a room and breaks the rules of an unspoken hierarchy. The kind of silence that says, "You weren't supposed to be right." Minutes after her fix went live, the engineering team confirmed what she had already spotted, a recursive logic bug that had slipped past 2 automated tools, a code review, and the eyes of 20 engineers. Her diagnosis wasn't a guess. It was correct down to the line number. Still, no one clapped, no one smiled. And then, the elevator doors opened. David Harrison, CTO of TechCorp, freshly buzz-cut, Patagonia vest zipped to his chin, stepped into the lobby like a judge entering the courtroom. He didn't acknowledge the interns scrambling to explain the situation. He didn't ask to see the code. He didn't even look at the log file still flashing green after her fix. Instead, he stared straight at Nia. His tone was icy. "Why is she even in here?" he asked, not about the bug or the solution, but about her presence. Nia, still holding her empty delivery bag, offered a brief, almost embarrassed explanation. She hadn't hacked anything. She hadn't touched a keyboard. She just pointed out something she saw. Helped. That's when David smirked and delivered the line that would come to haunt him months later. "Next time, just stick to what you're qualified for. Maybe apply for the janitor position on our dev floor." A few chuckled. Most didn't, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. To David, her act of insight wasn't impressive. It was offensive. She had made his team look slow. She had made him look slow. And in a culture where hierarchy ruled, the punishment would be swift and quiet. Within 48 hours, Nia noticed her delivery app status was suddenly inactive. No notifications, no new orders. She reached out to customer service and was told her account had been permanently disabled due to internal policy violations. No further details, no appeal option. Then it happened again and again. 3 platforms, gone. She wasn't just blocked, she was erased. And that's when it hit her. David didn't just want to forget her. He wanted to make sure she never had a chance to rise again. But Nia didn't disappear. She evolved. The silence that followed her deactivation hit harder than she expected. For Nia, it wasn't just about losing the job, it was about the world's response to her value. She had finally proven she could fix the same systems she once dreamed of working on. And the result? Punishment, disrespect, erasure. But where most people would see a closed door, Nia saw code. She started by pulling out an old sketchbook she kept in her closet, not filled with art, but with app concepts, system flow diagrams, and vulnerability modeling ideas she'd scribbled down during long delivery waits and sleepless nights. One diagram stood out, a flowchart for a platform that could map code dependencies and simulate live attacks based on user behavior and API patterns. She had drafted it over a year ago and forgotten it existed. This was no longer a rough idea. This was her blueprint for revenge, not against one man, but against the entire mindset that said you don't belong here. She named the project Eris after the mythical Eye of Foresight. But it wouldn't just see, it would predict. Not only would it flag vulnerabilities, it would understand the logic of the system, trace how a single faulty call could cascade through an infrastructure, and simulate worst-case outcomes before they occurred. Building it alone was no small task. Her ThinkPad fan sounded like it was auditioning for a jet engine. The internet in her apartment was patchy, and she couldn't afford the premium GitHub Copilot tools everyone else was using. So she turned to open-source libraries, archived white papers, and niche subreddits to get the job done. She coded in silence. No fanfare. No coffee shop Instagram posts. Just loops, branches, sandboxed virtual environments, and thousands of lines of code typed between microwave beeps and exhaustion. And slowly, the idea came to life. What made Eris special wasn't just its security scans. It was the way it thought. Nia taught it to read systems like she did. Not just line by line, but behaviorally. She gave it the same instincts that let her spot a subtle logic error in TechCorp's stack just by glancing at a screen. Except now, those instincts were written into the machine itself. No VC funding, no marketing team, just a woman building the tool she wished had existed the day she was humiliated. And what she didn't know yet was that someone inside TechCorp was watching her build. For a few weeks, it looked like Nia's story was going to disappear, buried under office gossip, NDA threats, and a trail of deleted logs. David Harrison had made sure of that. Internally, the narrative was being reshaped. The error fix was labeled a team discovery, and Nia was officially noted in an internal incident report as an unauthorized outsider. The fix, never attributed. Not even mentioned in client communications. But someone inside the walls of TechCorp hadn't forgotten what really happened. Amanda Yoon wasn't just another engineer in the crowd. She was a senior architect, respected, methodical, and not easily intimidated. She'd spent nearly a decade at TechCorp, earning her reputation the hard way. Solving impossible problems, mentoring younger devs, and staying quiet in boardroom meetings when louder men took credit for her ideas. But watching David erase Nia from the story was the last straw. Amanda had seen the fix happen in real time. She saw the log screens blink from red to green. She saw the Slack threads light up with disbelief. And then she saw those same threads quietly disappear from the company archive the next morning. That's when she knew this wasn't just a toxic moment. It was a cover-up. Amanda didn't make a scene. She didn't storm into HR. Instead, she did what brilliant engineers do. She observed, documented, and planned. Over the next few days, she gathered evidence, screen recordings, metadata, cached Slack messages, even internal emails showing David's attempts to manipulate the narrative and downplay the event. But it wasn't enough to know the truth. She had to find the person who sparked it. Reaching out to Nia wasn't easy. Amanda didn't even know if she'd respond, but after a few online breadcrumbs, a GitHub profile here, a half-finished portfolio there, she found a burner email Nia had listed on an old freelance listing. Amanda's message was short and cautious. "Hi Nia, I think you saved TechCorp's system 2 weeks ago. I was there. I've seen what they're trying to hide. If you're open to talking, I think we can do something about it. You deserved better." It sat unread for 2 days. Then, at 3:17 a.m., Nia replied with a single sentence, "Tell me everything you know." And just like that, 2 women, on opposite sides of the firewall, began rewriting the story that TechCorp tried to delete. At first, the leadership at TechCorp tried to downplay it. They issued a vague statement about a miscommunication regarding internal protocol and insisted the matter was being handled with discretion. But they underestimated one thing. The internet doesn't forget, and it doesn't let go. By the time the leaks reached Hacker News and Reddit's harsh tech culture, the story had outgrown TechCorp's control. Nia's name was everywhere. Screenshots of the Slack conversations were being dissected, line by line. Engineers from around the world were analyzing the exact bug she had spotted, validating her brilliance publicly. The consensus? This wasn't luck. This was next-level technical intuition. Worse still, internal whistleblowers began crawling out of the woodwork. Former employees, interns, even ex-contractors came forward with eerily similar stories. Stories of David Harrison shutting down promising ideas in meetings. Stories of credit being stolen. Stories of outright bias, racial, gender-based, and age-related. What had begun as one isolated incident was now spiraling into a systemic takedown. By day 5, TechCorp's biggest client, a major healthcare data platform, issued a public statement suspending all collaboration pending internal review. Their reasoning? We take ethical concerns in vendor partnerships seriously. Behind the scenes, they were furious. They had been relying on TechCorp's systems for HIPAA compliance, and if a bug like the one Nia found had gone unpatched for much longer, they would have been liable. Next came the investors. In a blistering Zoom call leaked by an anonymous employee, one of TechCorp's Series B investors grilled the leadership team on how a billion-dollar company had been outclassed by a freelance delivery worker and then retaliated against her. Their threat was simple: fix it, or funding gets pulled. But the knockout blow? That came when Amanda, under legal protection as a whistleblower, submitted full documentation of her internal reporting timeline, including the fact that she had alerted HR about David's actions before the story broke, and HR had buried it. Now, it wasn't just David on the line, it was the company's board, the brand, the integrity of its software. Suddenly, the CTO chair was empty. David Harrison was ousted without severance. His exit was framed as retirement in the press release, but internally, everyone knew. This wasn't a resignation, this was a collapse. And yet, even with David gone, the damage kept unraveling. 3 clients terminated their contracts. 2 lawsuits were filed, one for retaliation and wrongful deactivation on Nia's behalf, and another from former employees citing years of unchecked workplace discrimination. TechCorp stock dipped 12% in 2 weeks. Their Glassdoor page became a war zone. Job candidates pulled out of interviews, interns started ghosting, and through it all, Nia said nothing. She didn't need to, because the truth was speaking louder than any press release ever could. The first days of Secure Code Solutions were anything but glamorous. Nia was working out of her cousin's basement in College Park, the only space she could afford that had decent Wi-Fi and didn't leak when it rained. The desk was a folding table. The chair wobbled. Her monitor was secondhand. But what she did have was a product and a vision no amount of startup gloss could replicate. Eris wasn't just a vulnerability scanner, it was a predictive watchdog. While most platforms flagged bugs after deployment, Eris analyzed patterns in code logic as it was being written, using contextual inference to identify flaws before they became threats. It didn't just fix problems, it anticipated them. Nia had created something that mirrored the way she saw code, not as lines and syntax, but as behaviors, decisions, and potential consequences. She started small, offering free trials to indie developers and small agencies, many of whom had followed her story online. Within a few weeks, devs were tweeting about how Eris had caught errors their QA teams missed. A few testimonials went viral. One VC firm reached out, not because they were impressed with her pitch deck, she didn't have one, but because one of their own portfolio companies had used Eris and sent back glowing results. Investors were cautious at first. Nia was young, she had no degree, no corporate track record, but the product was undeniable, and her story? Irresistible. When she finally walked into her first pitch meeting, the room went silent. She didn't wear a blazer, she didn't throw buzzwords. She walked in with a laptop, opened a code editor, and showed them what Eris did. 10 minutes in, the lead investor slid the term sheet across the table. By the end of that quarter, Secure Code Solutions had closed $1.7 million in seed funding. Nia hired her first 3 engineers, 2 women of color and 1 non-binary dev from an apprenticeship program, none of whom had traditional resumes. They shared her story. They shared her mission, and they were hungry. Her first office? A shared co-working space next to a vape shop and a bakery. Her first big client? A logistics startup whose CTO said Eris reduced their bug backlog by 40% in the first 2 months. And by the end of that year, Secure Code Solutions was no longer just a startup. It was a movement, proof that code doesn't care where you come from, just what you can build. Last anyone heard, he was consulting at a shadowy data startup overseas. No LinkedIn, no public statements. His reputation? Beyond repair. Funny how that works. To every gatekeeper who thinks credentials beat competence, to every company that silences real talent because of ego, to every underestimated, overlooked, self-taught genius out there, this is your reminder. You belong. You're ready. And your code can change the world. If this story moved you, hit that like button, subscribe for more true tech stories, and follow us for behind-the-scenes content in the description below. We've got more stories like Nia's coming soon. And trust me, you do not want to miss what's next.